Okay, we got some business to get into today, and I got to go back here. But have you heard this one? And this is unbelievable. Empathy is a threat? Huh? What? Too much empathy is a threat. It's dangerous. Let me say that another time. Empathy is dangerous. Well, that's pretty funny, if you ask me, considering I've never heard of somebody having so much empathy that they wanted to hurt, harm, or worse with someone. Huh, interesting. Or how about this one? Too much empathy for the wrong people is bad and evil, even. You know, we don't want to understand at all. Sometimes, if you're this or that, or identify as this or that, and I empathize with you, because you're human and all, that is dangerous. That's wrong. That's immoral. Who defines wrong people? And when did empathy become so selective? And why is it being used as a lightning rod? When did this happen? When did this start? When did empathy become as a prominent billionaire, whose name is a type of melon, by the way, wink wink, liken too much empathy to civilizational suicide? Huh. Multiple syllable words here. For something like empathy? To paraphrase him, caring is good and all, but caring too much, well, that's the end of humanity, as he sees it. Huh. Dehumanization much? And now that Western society has increasingly become imbalanced with its economic and social classes, let's try to convince you that, empathy is bad, evil, unnecessary, dangerous, and ultimately, it's no good. Let's get rid of it. It's overrated. That's what they would have you believe. But I say, come again? Let me say this. No, not really. Caring less is the exact opposite, in my view, of the problems of the world. Caring is just the start, but empathy goes a bit beyond caring. Not to make this a semantics debate or contest, but empathy is feeling as if you are someone while you're understanding them. You're feeling their emotions. You're recognizing those. You're mirroring those. You see, when one empathizes, caring is a bare minimum. Empathy is one of the bridges of what makes us human. I would argue that if we couldn't empathize, what's left of us? We see, we hear, and to a great extent, as humanly possible, we feel as that person feels. So, what are we if we remove that? Food for thought. To the people with more money than God, though, as the old saying goes, what reason would I listen to people who have so much money, power, and influence? Why am I being lectured on something like empathy by billionaires? Having all that money almost makes something like empathy a chore or an act of stupidity. You know, that's for those people. Why empathize when I don't need to? Someone like this would say, I am the boss. Why would I listen to you or try to understand your plight, you little person? You see, I would argue the more money one has, aka billionaire class, the more correlated their lack of empathy is. Billionaires and the powers that may be are bereft of empathy, as far as I can tell. Finding an empathetic billionaire is like a needle in a haystack. And you don't have to have empathy when you can throw money around and power at everything. When do these people ever have to, empathize? Empathy is for the people who have to adapt and adjust to society, to others, to live in the actual world, real life. That's where empathy becomes monumental. I'm just saying, I refuse to be lectured by billionaires and the powerful on empathy in the same way I am going to sit and be lectured by someone on what makes a successful marriage who has been married, 7 different times. I mean, come on now. What are we doing? What are we doing? And why is empathy under attack? Well, let's get into it, shall we? What if the greatest crisis of our time isn't political? It's not economic. It's not technological. What if the greatest crisis is that we've somehow forgotten, well, how to recognize each other? Really? How to really see each other, empathize, relate. You see, that requires recognizing the other person as a human being in their totality, as they are, in their authentic nature. In part 1 of this section on empathy, we explored the idea that empathy isn't simply disappearing. It's being crowded out by fear, outrage, speed, the hustle and bustle, and tribal thinking. You see, we become siloed in our own algorithms. And I want to go a bit deeper on this topic today. Because before empathy dies, someone has to become less than human. And I'm not so sure that's the greatest thing for us. You see, history, the inconvenient thing, has shown us that every civilization that learned to stop seeing people as people eventually paid, the ultimate price. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, maybe some popcorn, maybe some tea, or heck, whatever keeps your existential crisis manageable. Let's talk. Let's get into it. You see, we don't hate individuals. I really feel that. I don't think we hate individuals. We hate representations, aka symbols. And this is one of the strangest psychological tricks that human beings perform. We don't really argue with people individually. In fact, we have stopped arguing with actual people. Instead, we argue with caricatures. The liberal, the conservative, the narcissist, the boomer, the snowflake, the woke mob, the cult member, the feminist, the elite, the therapist, the Christian, the atheist, the scientist, the influencer. You see, the moment someone becomes a category, they're no longer a person. And we do this a lot. You see this a lot. Go to any comment section on social media. They're no longer a person. They're an idea. And ideas are much easier to hate than faces. Most people aren't just hated by how they look, by their face alone. It's who they are, or the idea of who someone else thinks they are. Because you see, faces have stories. Ideas don't. And let's go back to social media. Social media didn't invent this. It just put it on blast. It made it big. It enhanced it. Humans have always formed tribes. Humans have always found their in-groups. That's normal, to an extent. Evolution rewarded loyalty. It rewarded cooperation. It rewarded protecting our own. But social media, like I said, put tribalism and groupthink on steroids. Every outrage becomes entertainment. Every disagreement becomes identity. Putting your line in the sand, as they say. Every mistake becomes permanent. The internet's forever. And algorithms don't ask, what makes people wiser, more connected? How do people slow down more, be more present? No, they ask, what keeps people scrolling? Unfortunately, Rage scrolls beautifully. Compassion? Eh, compassion, not nearly as profitable. Outrage feels like morality. And see, this is where things become dangerous. This is the real danger in it all. Sometimes outrage is appropriate. Sometimes we need to kick and throw our hands out and cry out. Injustice should bother us, should make us uncomfortable. Cruelty should upset us. Abuse should be confronted. But constant outrage creates this illusion, and it begins to feel like emotional intensity equals moral superiority. Let me say that again. It begins to feel like emotional intensity equals moral superiority. Nah. You see, I care more because I'm angrier, I'm louder, I'm more noisier. And that's not true, not necessarily. Sometimes anger is courage, and sometimes it's simply addiction wearing a superhero costume. If you've ever refreshed your phone hoping someone said something ridiculous, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You and I have both been there. Congratulations. You've accidentally joined the outrage gym. Didn't know that, did you? Outrage is everywhere. Outrage sells. Outrage is almost as popular as sex. Membership is free. Leaving is expensive. Well, empathy is an agreement. Can we clear that up? Yeah, let's clear that up. You see, empathy does not mean approving behavior. Empathy doesn't mean abandoning boundaries or necessarily agreeing or even necessarily liking. It doesn't mean allowing abuse, turning your back, turning away. Empathy simply asks one question. What happened inside this person's life that helped create this moment? You see, we all have stories. We're made up of stories. We're not accidentally the way that we are. Think about that. That question doesn't erase responsibility. It adds understanding. Understanding and accountability go together, and they can coexist. In fact, they're stronger together. We need those two in concert with each other. And now, let's get into this. The shadow we refuse to meet. Psychologists believe that every person carries a shadow, specifically Carl Jung. The shadow is this part of ourselves that we'd rather not acknowledge. It shows up as our pride, our envy, our cruelty, our insecurities, our hunger for more, for power, for influence, for creating a name for ourselves. But see, here's the uncomfortable part. The qualities that we condemn the most, passionately in others, are often the ones that we fear discovering in ourselves. Think about outrage again for a second. You see, sometimes the loudest accusations are really mirrors. So all that outrage towards others, that's really a finger pointing back at ourselves. So the war on empathy begins when we declare ourselves incapable of becoming the villain. And I got good and maybe some bad news for us. We are sometimes a villain. History often suggests this is true. Humility is remembering that under different circumstances, any of us could become someone we barely recognize. You know, that whole Nietzsche quote about staring into the abyss, being careful that you yourself do not become the monster. Yeah. We've been warned about this throughout ages. Philosophy, spiritual guides, you name it. Long before smartphones, nearly every spiritual tradition teaches some version of the same lesson, that every person standing in front of you possesses inherent worth. They're valuable and they're valued. Whether you call it a soul, a divine image, Buddha nature, sacred consciousness, whatever you call another person, or simply human dignity, the message is remarkably consistent and remarkably clear. When we forget the sacredness of another person, we slowly lose touch with ourselves, and we slowly lose touch with our own. Every act of dehumanization wounds both directions. The moment I dehumanize another, the moment I'm dehumanizing myself. And this is why curiosity is a radical act. Let's make curiosity radical, shall we? Imagine replacing one internet argument this week with one genuine question. What led you to believe that? Tell me your story. Tell me more. What happened? What happened to you? Not what's wrong with you. Really, what happened to you? You're not asking these questions because you're trying to win or get the upper hand, but because you're trying to understand. You see, curiosity, like feeling, has become strangely rebellious. Everyone wants to speak, but very few people really want to listen. Listening has become ultimately countercultural. Who has time for that? I've got places to be and things to do. I don't want to listen, and I don't need to. Come again? Compassion feels difficult. Many people aren't cruel because they're evil. They're exhausted, burned out, toast, cooked. They're afraid. They're lonely. They're ashamed. They feel shame. They feel worthless. People are carrying all sorts of unbearable sufferings and pain, often hand pieces of it to everybody they meet. This is what happens when we don't share ourselves empathically with others. Empathy isn't weakness. Sometimes empathy is refusing to become another link in the chain. This is why empathy should not ever die. Here's some practical ways, I should say, to fight or combat the war on empathy. Let's bring this down to the ground level, shall we? Here's a challenge for you this week. First, slow down. Pause. Pause before you react. Just simply sit and be. Don't react. You don't have to form an opinion within 30 seconds. You don't have to even respond or say anything out loud. Secondly, read something written by somebody you usually disagree with. Or heck, watch something you don't like or generally disagree with. Not to argue, but your only task is simply to understand. Third, assume every stranger is carrying a battle you cannot see. You've seen that thing on Facebook, and it's true. People, often you can't see what they're carrying, so be kind. Fourth, apologize faster. Pride is expensive. Humility costs less. Fifth, spend more time in actual, real, live conversations than comment sections. Human faces restore what anonymous usernames destroy. It's a lot harder to destroy somebody in person than it is online. Finally, practice seeing people instead of labels. That alone can change your life. People are much more than the categories, labels, and boxes that we put on them. Here's a lesson from Sacred Fox Consulting. There's an old image that has always fascinated me. A fox walking quietly through a forest. It doesn't scream at every bird. It doesn't argue with every tree. It pays attention. It survives because it observes. Wisdom begins with observation. It doesn't begin with rage. It doesn't begin with argument. Empathy begins with attention. And attention is becoming one of the rarest forms and resources in modern civilization. We live in an attention economy, but we don't really pay that much of it real attention, do we? And here's my closing thoughts. Maybe the war on empathy isn't won through grand speeches, large, grandiose, putting it out there. Maybe it's won in the small moments, the ordinary, back to the ordinary again. The conversation you choose, where you choose curiosity instead of contempt, where you pause more, sit more, relax more. The disagreement where you refuse to dehumanize, the apology you finally make, the forgiveness that you finally offer, the stranger you choose to see as a human being instead of an obstacle. Every act of empathy is quiet rebellion. And not because empathy is soft, on the contrary, because empathy refuses to let hatred write the final chapter. It doesn't allow hatred to win. And that itself is why it's so countercultural, and it's an act of rebellion. So here's my final question to you. Who have you reduced to a label? And who has reduced you to one? Have you ever been made to feel misunderstood, not seen, not felt, not heard? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this conversation challenged you, subscribe to Sacred Fox Consulting. This is where you and I, and all of us, discover ancient wisdom and use it with modern psychology, practical skills for rebuilding, and have honest yet thoughtful and humorous conversations about becoming more deeply human. And I say until next time, protect your mind, guard your heart, and don't let the world convince you that another human being is less than human. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Continue the journey of rebuilding, recovering, and rising. I'm Mr. Fox. I'll see you again. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again. It's my pleasure. I'm Mr. Fox. Welcome to Sacred Fox Consulting.